Hello PHP nutters and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at primitives, specifically the array primitive. And we don't like it. I don't like it. It's not good enough. And you know why? It's too primitive. It looks like this.
Primitive.
Okay, maybe I'm being a little bit harsh with arrays. They actually provide the very functionality that we want to build. We don't want the basic array when you're dealing with data coming out of a database. And there's some very good reasons why, which we'll probably cover in a future video, but we want to create the base object. Now, if you're looking at arrays, you're probably used to the very basic primitive like this. Now, PHP did add an array object, but it's not quite what we want. So, and also, it doesn't really help me illustrate how to write your own array object. So, we're going to ignore the fact that the array object exists natively within PHP, and we're going to create our own because, well, why not? And to help us achieve this lofty goal of creating our own array object, because the PHP one is just not good enough for us. No, it's not. And the primitives are not good enough for us. No, they are certainly not. So if we cast our minds back about a month ago, we created a basic object, which if you haven't seen the video, it was called something like the best PHP object you will ever write. Now, there's a kind of a reason why we made that object and why it was such a long-winded, really long video. That's because the basic object forms the basis for creating our own literal system, a little bit like JavaScript, in the fact that it's purely object-oriented and a little bit more advanced than the PHP primitives. If we scroll down to the class definition, we will see that the basic object already implements the iterator interface. Now that's going to allow us to iterate across our internal properties array. And that's exactly what we want. So we can basically extend the basic object. I said basically, basic. Yeah, okay. We can extend the basic object. So we're looking at class inheritance already. And we're going to create a basic array from our basic object. But we're going to want to add some additional things. So I've already created the shell of a basic array. So I've got here basic array extends my basic object. I'm already calling and use ArrayAccess interface, and I want to use the Countable interface. But before we start implementing some of these interfaces, I want to add some basic things. First of all, I need a construct, which is going to extend my basic object construct. And I also want to add a push method, which appends a value onto the end of our properties array, in the same way that the push method does the same thing in JavaScript arrays. So let's do that first. Now I have some code prepared so we don't have to watch me type so much. Okay, so the first one is the push method. So as it says, we're appending an element onto the end of our internal properties array. That is done in PHP like this. Okay, and now we're going to add a new construct. I just need to find my construct. Okay, and here we go. So our construct is basically accepting an array of properties, or it could be a basic array. But essentially what we're doing is we're iterating across our properties and pushing those properties into our push method. Now, there is a reason for this. If we wanted to extend our basic array, which we will want to do that later, we want to ensure that every time an element is pushed into the array, it is always of a certain type perhaps, or there may be other factors involved. So having this in our construct is really helpful for us. As always, the next thing we want to be doing is creating a test to make sure that our push functionality is doing exactly what we want. So I've already created a basic test here. So I'm going to create a new function called test push, and I'm going to create my array equals new basic array, which at the moment we should assert is empty. So we can say that by doing length, which was part of our basic object. So length is already giving us a count of the internal properties from basic object. And since basic array extends our basic object, we also inherit that length method. So we can do that. Now what we want to be able to do now is say, well, my array, I need to be able to push, say 1 into there, and then we can assert, assert equals 1 my array length. So we can say that this is now completed successfully. So we've got a green tick. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is change this so we can actually use the count interface. We're going to go back into, I'm just going to tidy this up, go back into our basic array and implement Countable. What this is going to allow us to do is wrap the count function around our basic array in order to get its length, rather than having to use the length method. So it is already added in my count method stub, and all I'm going to do is return this length, because it's essentially the same thing, but all we're doing is we're conforming to the Countable interface. We can test that. So if we go into our test, and I'm going to add it up here, so public function test count. All right, so this time I'm going to copy my array from here. I'm actually going to include a basic array. Am I? No, I'm not. I'm just going to do exactly the same as here. Okay, right. So instead of using length, what we're going to do is actually wrap count around our array, and it should provide us with exactly the same result. And it does. So great, we passed another test. The next thing we want to be able to do is to use our basic array as if it's a primitive array. And by that I mean we want to be able to access the elements using brackets. And if I go to my index.php, you can see here that I'm using a primitive array and I'm trying to access element 0, the 0 index of that array, and I'm using brackets like this to do it. So we want to be able to implement the same thing with basic array. At the moment we can't do it. So if I was to set up another test and say function test array access, I'm just going to get rid of this actually. I'm just going to copy my basic array instantiation. I'm going to add my element to it, and then I'm going to assert that 1 is equal to my array in 0 index, because that's where it should be. If I were to test this, it'll say, whoops, can't do that because your basic array is actually not a primitive. So we need to change that by implementing the ArrayAccess interface. So if we go back into basic array, and essentially we're going to implement the ArrayAccess interface, I'm going to add the stubs in, which PHP Storm does for me nicely. Right, okay, so I've got a load of to-dos here. If the offset exists, right, okay, so in our basic object, again, if you didn't watch the video, it's worth watching. We have a whole load of magic methods and we have a whole load of methods like get, set, is set somewhere down here. Yeah, cool. Right, so we can use these from our basic object to facilitate what we want for array access. So we're going to return this is set offset. All right, nice and easy. Okay, this one is offset get, so we're going to return this get whatever the offset is. This one is an offset set, which is the same as our set method. Here, it's a void, so we don't need to return anything. So we can just do this set offset value, because that's identical to our set method. And then an unset, which again is a void. So we can just do this unset, whatever our offset is. Okay. So that's our array access setup. Now we just need to be able to run our test again and see whether it works. Okay, so run that, and huzzah, it has worked. So we've got a green tick, which means that 1 stored in element index 0 is confirmed, and we have a object array behaving as if it is a primitive array. Okay, so basic array is already looking pretty good, although it is still very basic, and there's a whole load of functionality that I'm going to want to add. But I am going to leave the video here because I think we've covered enough for today. I think we've shown how you deal with class inheritance, so basic array inheriting a whole host of functionality from its parent, which would be the basic object. Remember, basic object is the best PHP object you will ever write. And we've kind of proven that a little bit. But anyway, moving along from the clickbaity titles, we will be adding more functionality to our basic array. I will be maintaining the code on GitHub, and there will be a link in the description below so you can gain access to GitHub and start playing around with the code yourself. We've also shown how you can continually improve or make sure that your code is working by implementing test-driven development. So without further ado, roll the outro.
Well, hey, not so primitive anymore. Remember to like and subscribe if you like this video.